Good morning.
Morning.
Is the mic on?
Yes.
All right. It's not always clear here. Whether,
Sometimes I can't hear.
yeah. So, good morning. Let's begin. Let's begin the class with a prayer. Please bow with me. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this time we have together. We thank you for this family of believers. We thank you for the freedom we have to come and worship together without fear. We pray that this time together is time that we approach your word with open minds and open hearts, that we gain greater understanding, your will for us and your plan, and we take things that we can apply in our lives so that we might be better servants for you. We are all imperfect, and we are in need of the grace and mercy that was a result of the perfect sacrifice on the cross. And today, as we do all Sundays, but especially today, we reflect on and remember the sacrifice of your Son, so that we might have the promise, the hope and promise of eternal life with you. We pray this in his holy name. Amen. We are working our way through Acts, and I think we're coming around the final bend. We're in Acts 26, and and just to briefly reset where we're at. Paul was taken into custody. Paul visited after his missionary journeys. Paul was led by the Spirit to go back to Jerusalem. The Spirit also told others that going back to Jerusalem was fraught with danger, and indeed that was the case. And he was, because of his presence in Jerusalem, there was a mob, and the Roman soldiers had to come and basically take him into custody for his protection. And long story short, here we are over 2 years later, and he's still in custody. We have changed Roman rulers in this time, and we have a new Roman ruler trying to sort out why he is such a problem from the Jerusalem standpoint. Why releasing him? Why do they want him killed? Why releasing him might be leading to greater problems. So the new ruler, Festus, he met with Paul, and let me back up. He invited the leaders in Jerusalem to come and present their case against Paul. They say this man needs to be executed because wherever he goes there's problems, and he's odious to the Jews. And so Festus is trying to sort out what is the issue here. So first thing he does is he invites those Jewish rulers to meet him in Caesarea, and we have that in chapter 25, where they present their case against him, and he presents his defense. And essentially their case against him is a bunch of accusations that really lack substance. And Paul's defense is basically there's nothing there. You hear what they say. You hear what I say. There's nothing there. I am not a threat to Roman rule. I'm not a threat to. I don't break laws, and on and on. So one might be, as we've discussed, one can be very sympathetic to Festus in this case, because he's trying to understand, and I think he's sincerely trying to understand what is going on here, because he doesn't really see the evidence to support why there is this bitterness towards Paul. He just doesn't really get it. So in the midst of this, we have King Agrippa, and that is ruling a neighboring, I hate to say kingdom, but neighboring province, and he is also subject to Rome. But unlike Festus, King Agrippa is a local. He is one of the Herodian kings. They are familiar with, they were raised as Jews. They're certainly very familiar with the Jewish religious beliefs. They're certainly very familiar with a lot of the cross currents of issues in society there. As we will see, he is familiar with Christianity, and he is also very familiar with who the Jews are, the different groups of the Jews, and what they are, and what their issues are, and perhaps could get has a greater insight into why there is such hatred towards Paul. So King Agrippa shows up, and Festus is like one leader to another saying, trading stories about what's your problem and what do you have on your agenda, and like any two people that have the similar jobs, you can kind of swap stories and swap problems and share problems and look for solutions. And I sense that this is no different than two people that have two preachers getting together, sharing stories, two managers getting together at a company, sharing stories of what they're struggling with, what's going good. And I think that's what we see here. And so Agrippa says basically, well, look, hey, let me hear him out. So they have described as a great pomp and circumstance. They have Paul brought before King Agrippa and Festus, and to just kind of present his case and to explain to King Agrippa. So the first thing that Paul says, and we read this last week, so I'm not going to reread it again. Really the first thing out of the gate he says, and back up for a second. We know, as we look through these different things, Paul's different speeches, his message is, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but we mentioned this. Something about Paul that is so powerful is that his message, his core message is unchanging. The gospel, whoever he's speaking to, he is speaking the gospel straight up. But he certainly tailors the gospel to his audience. And as mentioned, we have the example of Mars Hill. His message to them is not talking about the prophets, the Jewish prophets. His message to them is about an unknown God. That you acknowledge that there's a God out there that you're not aware of, and here I'm going to tell you about this God that's a greater God than all those that you believe. And one suspects, basically, from we get here from his defense to Festus, to just Festus, was basically probably similar to what we would, if we were in a court of law, how we would defend ourselves. These accusations are not true. These accusations are trumped up. There is no evidence. I am a good citizen. You cannot prove. There's no evidence here. Bring forth someone that has seen me breaking the law. Bring forth someone who some real evidence. So he's not really making a big. It kind of turns into he's able to get the two groups, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, kind of working against each other. And he says some things that he knows will be controversial and stir that up. But his message to Festus was basically, I am a citizen. I am a good citizen. Nobody has proved anything otherwise. So now he's in front of King Agrippa. King Agrippa is raised as a Jew, is familiar with the Jewish religion, or familiar with the law, familiar with the prophets. And so now we have him speaking in front of Agrippa, that we read most of which last week. His message is talking about what has been prophesied. And I want to say, well, first of all, what has been prophesied, that everything he believes is the confirmation of the prophecies. It is the manifestation of the prophecies. But what he also says is that that he was a persecutor of Christians. And what we see here is when he describes himself at that time, he was acting in good faith. And I think, and you know, we've discussed this before, but I think it's worth just kind of reemphasizing. When Jesus' interactions with the Pharisees over and over again, and he's confronting them, by and large, he is basically telling them that you're acting in bad faith, that you're twisting the law to your benefit, that you're twisting the law to your material benefit, you're twisting the law for your own personal power, and you're twisting the law to get what you want, without regard to what the intent behind the law is. Does that apply to every Pharisee? Absolutely not, because we see in Jesus' ministry, his interactions with a lot of individual Pharisees suggest that there are a lot of them that were very sincere in their beliefs and genuinely wanting to do the right thing, genuinely wanting to follow God and to serve God. And now we have the example of Paul. Paul did horrible things. Paul persecuted Christians. Paul encouraged and approved and participated in beating and killing of Christians. This was the man that God selected when he was on the road to Damascus to intervene in his life. There's a positive way to look at this, and there's a negative way to look at this. Positive way is that God knows our heart, and that's a positive and a negative way. God, regardless of how we act externally, regardless of God knows who we are. God knows who Paul really was. God knows Paul was sincerely thinking he was pleasing God by his actions and by persecuting these heretical Jews, who he saw, these Christians, he saw them as heretical Jews. And he thought that what he was doing was to purify and to please God. One challenge for us as we see this, and as he describes is as we study the Bible and we want to please God, is that we are approaching the Word with a tremendous amount of humility and a tremendous amount of having an open mind, because we have an example here of someone who sincerely was seeking to follow God and was doing things 100%, 180 degrees away from the way God wanted him to be, and or 100% contrary to God, how God wanted him to be. So, and I throw that out there. I could go in a lot of different directions, but I just want to mention that for us today, as we contemplate living our lives, as we contemplate studying the Word, that we genuinely approach the Word with humility, that we approach the Word with what God, an attempt to understand what God's desire for us is. And we don't approach the Word as running around looking for proof texts to see whatever our hobby horse is of issues. And you used an example a couple weeks ago. It's like, well, is this a proof text for X? And I won't go into that. And and you're asking a good question, because that's what people do. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't use that we absolutely should use a word, but we should make sure that we're approaching it with humility, and we're not have our opinions about how things are, and then we go to the Bible to support those. That we're studying the Bible with an open mind, and that we are seeking to find with how God wants us to be, God's will is in the Word. So moving along, so he basically lays out to Agrippa what his background as a Pharisee, which Agrippa would understand what that meant. He laid out to Agrippa that he was persecuting Christians because of his sincere belief that they were in error. And then he describes the event that happened to him on the way to Damascus. And then he turned. And he describes that the reason the reason that the Jews were upset with him is because his ministry was focused on reaching out to Gentiles, which as we've probably you get tired of me saying this as we've gone throughout Acts, but again and again and again, that is the issue. Again and again and again, we see Paul go somewhere and he goes to a new place and he goes into the synagogue and he talks to them and he shares the good news of Jesus with them, and they are receptive and they're open, and there's really without much controversy. Then between synagogue visits, he's out in the community and he's sharing that same message to Gentiles. And when Gentiles respond in any numbers, then the Jews become resentful of their access to this salvation, and that Paul is sharing this with them. So again and again and again, that is what the issue is. And that's what he says here in verse 20. Well, I'll start 19. Therefore, O King Agrippa, I was not, and we're in Acts 26. Therefore, O King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision, but declared first to those in Damascus, then in Jerusalem, and throughout all the region of Judea, and also to the Gentiles that they should repent, turn to God, performing deeds in keeping with their repentance. For this reason, the sharing with the Gentiles, for this reason the Jews seized me in the temple and tried to kill me. So he goes on, and then I'll read the next couple verses because then we're into where we're just begin where we didn't talk about last week. To this day, I have had the help that comes from God, so I stand here testifying both to small and great, saying nothing but what the prophets and Moses had said would come to pass, that the Christ must suffer, and that by being the first to rise from the dead, he would proclaim light both to our people and to the Gentiles. Okay, so he's saying that, talking about Jesus dying, being raised from the dead. And then Festus interjects at this point. As he was saying these things in his defense, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, you are out of your mind. Your great learning is driving you out of your mind. So we'll stop there for a second. What is he, when he hears Paul, when he says Paul's out of his mind, what is he talking about?
Maybe a couple of things.
There's more than one, but
The resurrection.
the resurrection.
You know,
Someone's died and come back to life.
that's, although Paul says something earlier in the sentence when he tells Agrippa, you know, why do people think it is unbelievable that God raises the dead? He makes that statement earlier on.
That's right.
Why are you talking about it real quick? It's interesting to me that Paul, every time he speaks to someone, with Agrippa as well, you know, you're the person that can do this the best. You know, he said something good. The only letter he writes is a Galatian letter. He doesn't start out with some sort of aggravating about what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
The other reason that it could be that when he mentions the Gentiles, because Festus knows that's going to create trouble.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the problem is. Anytime there's any kind of disconnect in the community, they have progressives.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be that.
Yes. It's all the above, probably. But what does he say about Paul? He gives some insight into how Paul presents himself.
Much learning.
Much learning. So this isn't some fisherman presenting himself and telling a story. This is a highly educated man, and he is. And although he was raised a Pharisee, he's originally from Tarsus. It is safe to assume that he is fluent in Greek, that he's highly articulate. This is not the normal person that's making a defense to Festus. And so Festus senses that this is a highly educated man. He's very eloquent. He's speaking. He's not not the someone that you would believe, that you would expect to be saying, talking about resurrection. And so he says, you know, there's too much going on in your head right now, and it's not adding up. So Paul replies, I am not out of my mind, most excellent Festus, but I am speaking true and rational words. For the king knows about these things, and to him I speak boldly. For I am persuaded that none of these things has escaped his notice, for this has not been done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe. So he's saying, and to your point, there's a lot going on here that Festus is probably like, whoa, wait. And he can't help himself, and he has to interject when Paul is talking about raising from the dead. But we have a tremendous amount of, you know, as we're all familiar with, tremendous amount of, from the, you know, in the Old Testament, prophets prophesying a Messiah. Fairly detailed prophecy of Messiah, giving a lot of, you know, the clearest example that we have now, or the most obvious one, is Isaiah 53. You read Isaiah 53, and it describes Jesus. It's easy retroactively to see that, but it is describing Jesus, and Agrippa would have been familiar with that. Daryl?
Well, I find it very good on Paul's part here at this point. Festus says, all your eyes are mine, and you're mad. I'm going to say you're mad. But Paul quickly turned it on him by bringing the king of Agrippa into it, saying, you believe. So now that kind of, Festus is not the one to argue that point now, because Paul is saying the king agrees with me.
Right. Well, he does a nice debate technique. Instead of just getting defensive and saying, no, you're wrong, he kind of shifts it a little bit and says, okay, all right, Festus, I'm just kind of pretend what you said. That's not gonna stir me up and not gonna throw me off balance. Okay, Agrippa, everything that I've said, you're aware of these things. None of the prophecies are all out there. You're well aware of this. It's not a secret. The life of Jesus is not a secret. There may, all these things these are not secrets to Agrippa. Now, Festus, it may seem like a bunch of weird stories and a bunch of and prophecy, ancient prophecies, and all this. And Festus was not familiar with those, but for Agrippa, he's familiar with all these.
Festus was Roman. Yeah, no. He would have never exactly right when he's unfamiliar with that. It may have been more the resurrection of the dead through him.
Well, that's where he stops it. That's where he says, "Wait a second. You sound like an intelligent man, but you're talking about resurrection." But yes. And I didn't make it clear earlier, but yeah, Festus is new to the scene. He's relatively new. He's trying to figure this out. He is a Roman, and he is kind of and the whole purpose of this meeting here is for him to let Agrippa hear him out and get Agrippa's take on it. So Paul says, so when Festus says this stuff's crazy, it's crazy talk, Paul doesn't argue with him. He just kind of turns to Agrippa and says, you know all the prophecies. You know all the things I've talked about here. You're familiar with all these. And these are not secrets for those of us that are here. So what does Agrippa say? He says, I know, well, go ahead.
They're not just his knowledge of the scriptures. 1 Corinthians 15 shares, there's a lot of folks that have seen the risen Lord. That's right. And there's a lot of talk. And he would know. So he has heard that talk. Now, he didn't see Jesus himself. There'd be a evidence, but at least he's heard, hey, there's a lot of discussion. A lot of folks have seen the risen. That's right.
He would have been aware, whether or not he believed it, whether or not he, he would have been aware that there was a lot of people that believed beyond that. He would be aware that there's a lot of people that said, I saw a raised Jesus. He would have been aware of that. So, Paul says, King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe. So I'll just say this is another good debating technique, is to get people to say yes on your way to trying to persuade them or your way to make a point. So he's asking a question to Agrippa that he knows the answer to. He knows Agrippa is a believer in the that is a Jewish believer, may not be a believer, not. He didn't ask him if he believed in the resurrection. He didn't ask him if he believed. He asked him, do you believe in the prophets? Knowing what the answer to yes, him answering yes to that question would really open the door to him saying, well, you know what the prophets say. Okay, let's talk about Jesus and how he is the fulfillment, the things that he did in his life, and that those fulfill the prophecies. So Agrippa said to Paul, in a short time, would you persuade me to be a Christian? He asked a question. It's a very interesting reaction. So you've got, on the one hand, you got Festus saying, this is crazy talk. And on the other hand, Agrippa is basically saying, I'm 3/4 of the way there, to believing all this. And so Paul's response is, whether short or long, I would to God that not only you, but also all who hear me this day might become such as I am, except for these chains. So,
Either way you look at that passage, there's some
Discrepancies in what is Agrippa really saying. One translation says almost you persuaded me to be a Christian. I think it's more accurate in a short time. The questioners become the questions, when this kind of turn the tables on them. Is he saying, are you trying to convince me more so than I'm almost? Either way, it's a significant statement.
Right. And I'm not. And you could read it either way. And I don't know that I would necessarily go so far as to say that he is saying I'm almost there. I said 3/4 away, but he's saying that the door is open. That what I see is at the very least he's saying you're making a compelling case here, Jim. And then
Version says, can you change me to be a Christian in such a short time? Which might mean that if we had more time to talk, we could discuss this. And I think that's what you might be looking for, because I think that's where he's at. He's not disagreeing with you, but he's not agreeing with you.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Paul's kind of set the stage that he's laid out all the facts there, and he already knows, and he's heard of all the people talk about miracles that he's not seen, but he's heard other people that have witnessed those, not only the death, burial, and resurrection, but all that he's seen other than that everybody's talked about. So he's saying, if your heart's a little hardened, then can you also be transformed?
The NIV says, do you think in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian? It's for him, he's a big political king and leader here. He's probably not in a position where he can just learn out what he necessarily thinks. And he may hesitate on the basis that he's there with his sister, who's also the lover. And so, if he's thinking about it, if he admits it, then he's going to have to think about what he's doing. I'm trying to do this.
I didn't go into that. There's a whole lot going on in here. There is a whole lot going on here. And I don't think that, he was ready to he's ready to be baptized. Let's put it that way. The point is that Paul's case was so compelling that he could not just chime in to echo what Festus said and say, this is crazy.
Because there's some evidence.
There's evidence. He knows that he couldn't deny anything Paul said. And in fact, most of what Paul said, he would accept that as fact, or that's what the prophecy was, or well, I know this has happened and that happened. And the things that he may not be fully there on, the resurrection of Jesus being one, he would certainly be have an awareness that there's a lot of people that have personal experience, or claim to have personal experience of seeing Jesus after his crucifixion.
You talk about the fact that he asked the question. A lot of times lawyers try to only ask questions of the witnesses of what they already know the answer is going to be. And when you think about Philip and the eunuch, I always love that particular conversion story, because Philip started where the eunuch was at. He didn't say, okay, let's put that aside, let's go. He taught Jesus from where he's at. And so once again, it's like there's a question, there's a connection already. When you're talking to people and you get them into agreement of the logic, they know this, they know A, they know B, they know C. Oh, by the way, there's also D. Wait a minute. They were right about A, B, and C. Look, think about D a little bit stronger.
Right. More open to it.
So that is basically the end of Paul's defense or his explanation. And then we have verse 30. Any other comments?
I'd like to comment on a couple of things, kind of jump in behind on exactly what Rick said and what you had said earlier about how Paul tailors his message. When he speaks to the mobs and the Roman soldiers came down from the Tower of Antonio and got him, and he speaks to the crowd, Ananias plays a major role in that discussion, in that talk that he gives to the mob. And in describing Ananias, he says he's a devout Jew, well respected by all the Jews in Damascus. He's using persuasive language to that audience. And now this audience in front of Agrippa and Festus, Ananias is not even mentioned. And that's an example of what you and Brett had just said. Paul is very cognizant of his audience and where they are and what they need to hear.
Right.
So understanding that, as we read through Paul's defense, he's not just defending himself, he's laying out the gospel as to what these men, these leaders, and all the court officials need to hear.
That's right.
But in every case where he tailors the gospel, he includes the resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
That is one consistent message. He always includes the resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting that Agrippa says, almost whatever phraseology exactly that he uses the word Christian. And I don't see where Paul is saying, I'm converting people or I'm teaching people to be Christians. Paul's talking about the issues that lead to that. Agrippa puts two and two together. Agrippa uses the word Christian. Would you persuade me to? Agrippa sees where Paul's headed.
Right.
But also going back to when Paul first came, before the mob tried to lynch him, the brethren in Jerusalem said, how many thousands of Jews have believed and remain zealous for the law?
Mm-hmm.
Some commentaries will estimate that as many as 50,000 Christians in Jerusalem at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So Agrippa, as was mentioned, is a consummate politician.
Absolutely.
He's got a large Christian political bloc, if you will,
Of the
in
Sundays.
that area.
Right.
So he's playing both sides and not going to come down and make his choice. But he recognizes and he uses the word Christian.
Mm-hmm.
He sees exactly what Paul is doing. he's leading people to Christ.
That's right. He is explaining what he has done, and explaining, and ostensibly his purpose is to defend himself and to explain himself, but in so doing, he's presenting the gospel. So, Jim.
I have one comment because in the same translation it said, "Can you change me to become a Christian in a short time?" Is that what you think? I think it's Paul's response in this translation is important for us in our dealings with people today. Paul answered, "It is not important if it takes a long time or a short time. I pray to God for you and for everyone who is listening to me today. I pray that you all may all become like me." So I think that's important for us to know. When someone like King Agrippa says, you think you can change my mind in a short time, or whatever comment they may make like that, to not just give up and walk away.
All right, so verse 30. Then the king arose, and the governor and Bernice and those who were sitting with them. And when they had withdrawn, they said to another, "This man is doing nothing to deserve death or imprisonment." And Agrippa said to Festus, "This man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar." So we have, I'm going to approach this little section with a high degree of doubt and cynicism. They do agree. Here's what I don't agree. I don't approach with doubt is the part where they said this man has done nothing to merit imprisonment or punishment. That he is that he has. They heard him. They've heard. Festus have heard him in different settings. He put him in front of Agrippa to get Agrippa's perspective on this, and Agrippa's perspective is, well, he's done nothing to merit being imprisoned or punished and when he appealed to Caesar, he kind of sealed his fate, for better or for worse, that he was set to go to see Caesar, not to. This wasn't going to be settled in Caesarea. So it's easy to say that. It's very easy to say, well, had he not appealed to Caesar, but we have about over 2 years of history here where first Felix and now Festus have both been hesitant to let him go, even though they really don't have anything against him, for fear of the mob, for fear of civil unrest, maybe sincerely for fear for Paul's life. But I think more realistically, more fear for just the whole political situation and the civil situation, that there would be a lot of things going on should Paul walk out a free man and not under their protection. So, although I think that what's said here is sincere, I think what Agrippa said was sincere. Had Paul not appealed to, it's easy to be able to say that, given that option was not even available to them anymore, or it's not available to Festus anymore. But had Paul not appealed to Caesar, would he have been released? That's a hypothetical question. My opinion is they didn't want to release him because of the turmoil that would result. But because they hadn't, even though they really didn't have anything against him, but we don't really know the answer to that question.
We don't know the answer to that because the situation, the political situation, may be too tough for them to do that. But I really think that they thought, they're making this comment because they thought, he really is guilty. He really isn't. So that's sincere. I agree with that. That part I think is sincere. And he says it could have been released had he not appealed to Rome. And that took a lot of options off the table. There may have been a debate separately about other things, but his innocence would have. I think Agrippa would have said, he's innocent. Whatever I had to do, whether I had to kill him or whatever, he's still an innocent person for what they accused him of. What they accused him of.
We don't know what would have happened. Every incentive from when he was first, for the Roman rulers, for Felix and Festus, every incentive was for them to find him guilty of something. That's the easy thing. That would have been easy for them. That said, okay, yeah, he was guilty of this. He was guilty of, and then they could punish him, and then the Jews would be satisfied, and then, that's why we're seeing again and again and again. He speaks before the crowd. He speaks before Felix. And then Festus and then Felix have further conversations with him. And then Felix shows up, and then this is the second, or probably maybe even more than that time he's heard Paul out. And they're wanting to hear him again and again. They want to hear the Jew side, and then there's never anything there for them to act on. Scott.
Part of the story, I haven't gotten him released either because he's got to go to Rome. And this is the perfect way he's gonna get there.
That's right.
It is one way that will. This is God's plan, and this is how. You'd like to think God's plan would be allowed him freely to go to Rome, but that's not. But this is not how it's working out.
I think you accidentally spoke a little bit there. They couldn't have done anything. The moment he appealed to Caesar, the only thing they could do is give a ruling. They could not punish, they could not release.
Right.
Now, the thing is just like the military court martial, once you appeal to a mass or something, and it has to go up that far, you still have to go through all the lower ones, and they have to give a ruling so that it can be handed up to the one above.
So they know what they're dealing with.
So, the reason why he's asking this again and trying to get an idea of what he's going to send up with Paul when he sends him to Rome is the fact that, if whatever ruling he gives is countermanded, it looks very bad on him. So he's trying to understand it, and I think that's why he pulled in Agrippa and said, "Look, you're more familiar with these Jews.
Right.
To me, they're a bunch of weirdos that aren't like the rest of us civilized people who believe in these weird things, and help me out."
That's right.
So you've got a local who is familiar, who is a Jew. And he's wanting to hear, okay, what's your take on this?
Mm-hmm.
Is there some custom that he has broken that I can put forward, or give me some information? So the comment that was made there, look, he's done nothing wrong, and you could let him go, except you got to send him up. Really is basically him saying, this is what, if it was in my jurisdiction, this is the verdict I would send to Caesar. I would send to Caesar completely not guilty, unfounded charges. It's in your hands.
Some of that, and I'm sorry I didn't make it clear, some of that we discussed last week, that the purpose of this putting him in front of Agrippa, and you're right. When I was talking about their options of letting him go, that option was taken out when he appealed to. Prior to that, he did have multiple meetings, and even then they didn't have anything. And you're right.
But the other punishment was also taken off.
That's right. It was all taken off. And part of the reason for including Agrippa is so he could get his take on it and get kind of some understanding of the nuance of the local of what these religious beliefs are, and kind of try to make sense of, is this man really off base? Is he really that odious, or why is he? So the point, yeah, and you're right. Agrippa's saying, well, you ask me, you send your report. I mean, he's not done anything wrong, and he probably should be released. But my point is that had he not appealed to Rome, I don't know that. It's easy for them to say this at this point, but had he not appealed to Rome, I don't know that he would have been released just because out of political considerations. Jim?
Well,
We all know that God wants him to go to Rome. So he's going to Rome. God's making this happen. And we're speculating about a lot of things. But one of the things that and then you just, in your conversation, made me think of this. The things that are happening to Paul along every step of the way, and every step of the way, everybody's saying, well, he's not guilty. He has done nothing wrong. But we're kicking it up, to the next level. And even Paul appealed to Rome, so they're like, well, he's not guilty, but now we got to send him to Rome. The Bible does not speak to the people that were perhaps witnesses to these events, that when Paul went to this person and was found not really guilty, but we're going to kick it up, and everything that happened to Paul this way, what his influence or the events' influence on their lives were. Because God is making this happen for Paul to be a witness to things that he does that happen to him, people see. And there may be people that became Christians because they saw this. The Bible doesn't speak to that.
We don't know, but there's every reason to believe that what you're saying is correct. And furthermore, and we're out of time, and then next week we'll start in 27, and we'll start some traveling. But something that's noted in the beginning of chapter 27, that this imprisonment is not an imprisonment like we think of necessarily, where you're at a penitentiary and access is extremely limited. He has free access to people that want to visit him. Can he travel? No. Can he leave town? No. And I don't know that his movement within the city is even free. But as far as people coming to see him, him writing letters, and so forth, that is not restricted at all. And his influence continues, even though he's imprisoned. We know some of the letters were written while he was imprisoned. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. So it gave him, his ministry was not placed on hold during this. It continued, and God continued to use him, even though he couldn't travel like he could. So we will stop there, pick up in 27 next week. And appreciate everyone being here. For those that are online, we'll be back on in a little over 10 minutes.